welcome back to Conversations with Therapists. Today I'm joined by Lola Sciarcon from the Colorado Center for Couples and Families. Welcome, Lola. Thank you for being here.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, Lola, you've worn many hats as an educator, an advocate, parent, partner, and self-described conductor of the Hot Mess Express. How do those lived experiences shape the way you sit with clients and their struggles?
I have seen and been through a lot, both personally and professionally. And sometimes, and I'm sure most people feel like this, that like life can feel like just a total blur and nobody understands really what the struggles are that you're encountering personally. That can feel really isolating. And so it's in those moments that I've experienced for myself that the most important thing for me was for having somebody to hold space for what I was experiencing, to get me out of my own head and almost to reaffirm that I'm not crazy. And so I feel like that's really valuable. For someone to sit and be able to just hold space for my experience was what I needed in those moments where I just didn't really trust myself. And so that is really invaluable to me. And I just, hope I can give that to others because I understand the importance of feeling like somebody sees me. And I just hope I can give that to others.
You describe your work as warm, down to earth, and rooted in curiosity. When someone first sits down with you in a session, what do you hope they feel in those first few minutes with you?
I hope that they feel seen. I hope that they recognize that their experience and their life, it matters. And even if it feels like to the outside world, maybe nobody does care, I genuinely want to hear about those parts of people that are ugly and that are messy. And I want them to feel like they can give space and honor those parts of themselves and move through that pain so that, we can together kind of bring them into a space of healing. I think that shame is something that's so huge for, I think, most people. And when we don't acknowledge it, we don't recognize it, and we stuff it down, it just stays there and we hold it in our body. And so instead of ignoring it and stuffing it down, I hope that when people come into the space with me, they can acknowledge that these places exist and it's okay for them to be there and that we can move through them together.
I really like how you want clients to just feel comfortable to lay it all out there and show their darkest, most shameful parts. But how does one get to that point, especially if someone's never been to therapy or they're just seeing you for the first time? How do you build a connection with your client? How do you create a safe space so that they can get to that point? Because some people are very vulnerable and off the bat will just open up and sort of trauma dump in colloquial terms. But a lot of people are guarded and have a lot of trust issues. So how do you see that with clients who may be a little bit more on the fence, a little bit less quick to open up and kind of bare their soul in the way that you know how to accept them to do?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that one of the most important things is just meeting people where they're at. And so you're absolutely right in that there are people who will just word vomit their trauma all over you and just want to express that outwardly and release it and talk about it. And there are people for whom that is really scary. And in fact, they have learned throughout their life that if they share that kind of information, it's actually not safe for them, or it hurts even more and they don't get the response that they're hoping to get. So ultimately, when they sit together or when we sit together, that my hope is that I meet them where they're at and I'm a space in which we can just have these gentle conversations about what your experience is like. And we don't start by going in and then jumping off the deep end, but understanding who you are and what makes you show up in the ways that you do is just as important, and hearing that story from people and letting them just share it and making them understand or helping them to understand that it makes sense that they are guarded or they show up the way they do because they've had a lifetime of experience that tells them that this is the way that they protect themselves. I just want to give them space to show up in the way that they feel safe in the moment so that they can start to understand and feel that it's a place where this might be a corrective experience for them, where they can share those deeper feelings that maybe somebody hasn't been able to hold for them before.
You often say that humans are wired for connection, but relationships can get really messy. And in your experience, what tends to get couples or families stuck in the same patterns over and over again? And in your work, what do you aim to do both in the long term as a process, but also in the short term, like when couples and families first come in to see you?
Yeah, that's a great question too. I would say that, yeah, we are wired for connection and we're also wired for protection. And so there's this part of us that when we get into a system or we get into a cycle with somebody where the first instinctual thing that we do is protect ourselves. And I think that that is part of what really gets us stuck in these messy relationships because there's so much going on underneath. So it makes sense that we're wired for protecting ourselves. And then we're also wired to reach out for others when we need some sort of support. I think it gets stuck when we get into these patterns where we're coming from this place of protection and self-preservation, and we lose the capacity to just kind of slow down and explore our own behaviors and our own experiences. We sometimes reinforce that isolation when we do that because we're protecting ourselves, and that totally makes sense, right? So when we go into these modes of protection and not connection, that's when we kind of run the risk of that isolation and feeling like people don't hear us or see us because we're not sharing the things that are actually underneath. At the same time, connection can be really risky. That makes sense that we kind of protect ourselves, and at the same time, healing comes from that connection. So it's about learning and understanding and organizing what's happening for you in the system, and then feeling safe enough in the room to take that risk to try to have a connective experience and to have somebody validate your experience for you, which is why I'm there, because your experience matters and it makes sense. And so if you can understand that, and then you can understand why your partner or your partners or your family see it in a different way because they have an entirely different system they go through, you can start to have more empathy for A, what's happening for you, but B, what's happening for the people around you too.
I don't know if I've ever thought about relationships in that way, that they can both be the source. I mean, I've thought about it separately, but not together. That connection can be the source of stress and the source of issues, but can also be the healing part together, both at the same time, if framed and worked on in the right way with the right people surrounding you and the right support. It's interesting how it can be both at sometimes at the same time.
And that's the ironic and confusing part, right? Because part of you is saying, I need to protect myself. Maybe this person hasn't responded to me in the ways that have felt safe for me before. And at the same time, we don't exist in a vacuum and we don't exist in isolation. And in order to rewire our brain and in order to change who we are at a very fundamental level, we need to have corrective experiences. We can't just talk about it and say, I feel better now. We have to literally have this practice of corrective experiences that change the way that we respond to others and the way that our brain works.
I feel like we only scratch the surface of the amazing work that you do. But for someone who's watching and maybe thinking, I don't even know what's wrong, I just know that something feels off. How do you help people begin the process of figuring things out without judgment or pressure to have it all together, and help people ultimately take the first step and get the support that they need?
I start off by understanding, first of all, that I think nobody has it together. I think everybody has to a degree, and there's different layers. And sometimes we don't know what's wrong. We know that there's just this like gut feeling or this sinking feeling that, something feels off. And that's different for everybody. So the first step for me is I'm curious to know what off feels like for you, or even what on feels like. What's feeling different about this off than normal? That comes in like different forms. And so I want to explore and linger in the thoughts you're telling yourself. What's feeling off? Maybe there's this gnawing feeling, or I'm feeling sad, or what if I didn't do well at my job today? And I want to kind of just explore it and sit in it and look at it from all of these angles. And so lingering in the thoughts and then the feelings you're experiencing, what you're attaching to those, whether they be shame or fear or frustration, and then what's physically happening in your body. What's the felt sense of your experience? Are you noticing that tightness when you're feeling stressed out? Or are you noticing your arms are getting tingly when you're getting nervous and your pace is speeding up? And just starting to connect all of those pieces and organizing them. In that, it's more about just understanding it and giving it space and not putting value on it or trying to make sense of it in the moment. Just giving you a moment to breathe and think and feel and exist so that you can kind of start to make these connections for yourself. I don't have all the answers, and I think none of us have all the answers, but I just want to provide a space and an opportunity to explore what's actually happening for people. And that takes time and it takes some practice, especially for those who haven't had the practice of feeling their feelings. So
thank you so much for coming on and speaking so openly and just so honestly about who you are and what it's like to have you as a therapist and your support and what you really try to cultivate when you work with clients. I think whoever's watching has a really great sense now of who you are and the important work that you do. I'm really excited for whoever needs to and wants to reach out to you and learn more.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.